Hello, and welcome to a special festive bonus edition of the Gallimaufry, a podcast about history. I'm Will, and with me, as always, is my co-host Nick, though he doesn't seem to be in the carpet shop this time. Do you care to explain?
Well, you can talk, you're not there either.
No, I suppose not. So sadly today the carpet shop is empty. We are recording from our homes due to the lockdown at the moment, but hopefully that shouldn't be too much of a detriment for us. So for this bonus episode, we're going to be looking at the origins of Christmas, as well as some of the weirder and more interesting traditions. So here's something to listen to just to get you in the mood.
Merry Christmas to everybody!
Yes, today we'll be talking about that magical time of year when we eat too much, spend too much, and have embarrassing amounts of alcohol that lead to poor life decisions. Although in my case, they were probably some of the best decisions I've ever made. Particularly in these recent years, I've had great Christmases with some wonderful people. But as always, if it is a difficult time of year for you with the lockdown and different things like that, there are organisations you can contact and talk to and reach out to if you are feeling a bit lonely and blue. But yes, it is Christmas, the Yuletide, Noel, or the winter solstice, or even just halfway out the dark. Christmas is a bunch of different traditions that have been repackaged and rebranded over countless generations. And throughout most cultures in Europe, winter was a time to rejoice. You know, it was a time to slaughter the livestock and make merry as the dark night set in and began to get light again. It was actually quite a hedonistic time. Even when Christians came along and said, you should, love Jesus and all that. But people were still a bit raucous.
So Christmas has had a slightly muddled, might I say, hodgepodged history to it.
Wow, I love it. Getting the branding in there.
Thank you. So the Christmas we know today, a lot of the traditions that we celebrate, they feel like they go back centuries, but a lot of them are actually quite recent. Though the very origins of Christmas can be traced back centuries and centuries, back to ancient peoples. It seems to sort of stem from festivals around the winter solstice, which is around the 21st, 22nd December every year. And it's the shortest day. So up until this point, the days have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And now they're going to start getting longer. So it's natural to want to celebrate. And this is normally done through feasting. And it's from here that we can see sort of the very origins of what was later to become what we know as Christmas.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And just to point out, this is very Northern Hemisphere centric, if that's a thing, because obviously the Southern Hemisphere, they experience this in June. But yeah, there are lots of different cultures all across Europe that had festivals celebrating their various gods and other sort of traditions. For instance, the Romans, they had a holiday in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. And in the week leading up to the winter solstice, for basically a full month after, they got drunk, ate a lot of food, slaves became masters, peasants ran the show, businesses and schools were closed, and everyone basically just had a big party. And actually on the 25th itself, there was a day called Sol Invictus, which was a day celebrating the solstice itself. The sun returns high to the sky after getting lower.
Of course, it wasn't just the Romans who celebrated the solstice. It was also celebrated in Scandinavia, where the Norse celebrated Yule, which also comes from a word for the sun god Odin, and means wheel in Old German, as they thought the sun was a wheel. And this was celebrated from the solstice through to January. So in recognition of the return of the sun after the solstice, fathers and sons would bring home large logs, which they would then set on fire. The people would feast until the log had burned out, and being as they were quite large logs, it could take up to 12 days. The Norse believed that each spark from the fire represented a new pig or calf that would be born during the coming year.
So they could be slaughtered in time for the next winter. It's a reoccurring theme that lots of people get drunk, slaughter animals, and hunker down.
I mean, what better way to make it through the long winter months then? So keeping in that region of the world, in Germany, a little further south, people honoured the pagan god Odin during the midwinter holiday as well. The Germans were terrified of Odin, as they believed he made nocturnal flights through the sky to observe his people, and then he would decide who would prosper and who would perish. So because of his presence, many people would choose to stay inside during this period.
I mean, if that doesn't sound like Father Christmas, I don't know what else is.
Yeah, it's a sort of slightly more judgmental Father Christmas. When they say he would decide if they would perish, I don't know if he did the dirty work himself or if somebody came around later to do it.
It's got the interns in. There are stories like this all across Europe. There are different nations and cultures that all have very similar sort of ideas of holidays around this season. And this is really why we have Christmas as we have it today. Now, we all know Christmas celebrates the birth of Jesus, who's obviously the huge part of Christianity. But of course, Christmas isn't actually the most important holiday in Christianity. Easter is. The church began formally celebrating it on December the 25th in 336 CE or AD during the reign of Emperor Constantine. And he was really one of the driving forces behind making the Romans Christian and making the Roman Empire a beacon of Christianity. And the reason they chose this day is basically because they all sat down in Rome and decided to celebrate it. Because for years, people have been trying to work out when Jesus was actually born. Nowhere in the Bible does it say when he's born. There's like no date, no bits of information, diary entries from Joseph or anything like that. It's complete mystery. And so, because Rome obviously had all these preceding festivals, it made sense to have the holiday around the 25th.
It was sort of a convenient way of transitioning the population from the old beliefs to Christianity. You can take a festival that they had already and just kind of rework it so that it's compatible with the new ways.
Basically, yeah. And that was part of the reasoning behind it as well. And from then, for a good couple of 100 years, people celebrated Christmas in the same ways. They had lots of food, they got drunk. It was quite rowdy, even amongst the sort of more strict sort of Christian nations. People still just let loose and had fun. And you have the beginnings of different traditions popping up throughout the centuries. So one of the things that surprised me when I was researching this was the idea of the Christmas tree. Now, where do you think Christmas trees come from?
Now, you're going to tell me I'm wrong, I expect, but I always thought...
I mean, I do that a lot, so it's lost all meaning.
It's just a given, really, at this point, isn't it? As far as Britain was concerned, I thought it came over with Albert from Germany.
You're almost right. It was a German, but it was actually George III's wife, Charlotte of... I'm going to say this wrong. Sorry, Germans. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz.
Well, this episode is all about traditions, and I would say one of our traditions is horribly mispronouncing foreign words.
Interesting that the actual origin of the first Christmas tree is disputed. There's actually a very sort of big national tug of war over it between Latvia and Estonia over who's set up the first Christmas tree. But the first sort of recorded accounts of it in the traditional sense that we know, as it being a Christmas tree, presents under it, was in Freiburg in Germany in about 1419. But interestingly, trees before then were used in plays that were put on at Christmas as a stage prop. And it comes from something called the Paradise Play, which is a play all about Adam and Eve. And it was a play they used to put on at Christmas because it was celebrated around that time, and it was thought the events of Adam and Eve happened around then as well. It was usually celebrated on the 24th. And these plays were performed all around Europe. They would draw big crowds, and then they just sort of died out. And they survived thanks to a little village on the Danube in Hungary, where they just kept doing it right up until the 19th century, when people rediscovered the village and then came along and said, what are you doing? What is this play? And I think they're still performed in places as well. But yeah, the Christmas tree started out as a stage prop based on the tree from the story of Adam and Eve.
So was it originally an apple tree, or was it always the Nordic spruce?
No, it was decorated with apples, yes, and other things.
So even before we started bringing trees inside the house, it was a tradition going back a long time to bring in greenery into the house. I know in Britain it was traditional to bring in holly and ivy and rosemary and bay and these sort of plants which would still be green during the winter months. So even though we didn't have trees, it is quite an old tradition, isn't it?
Yeah, gradually from the sort of 15th, 16th century, you have trees being used in the sense that we know them today, and then it was really the Christmas we know today was really formed in the sort of late 18th, 19th centuries. And it's a combination of Victorian values, those lovely old Victorians imposing their worldviews on, on many millions of people, and also the Americans who would then take over that role. So you have, obviously, Charles Dickens writing things like The Christmas Carol, but there was also a book written in 1819 by an American author called Washington Irvine called The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent, which is a series of stories around the celebration of Christmas in an English manor house. And it's basically all made up. He just completely makes up these traditions and ideas about these two peasants who come home for the holiday, where they sort of mingle with different classes and everyone has food and exchange gifts and everyone's all lovely to each other. And it kind of is a direct response to a lot of turmoil that was happening in America at the time. This particularly around Christmas. There were lots of riots in cities like New York where things just got out of control. His sort of book helped turn it more towards a day of reflection and appreciating your family and the things we know about it today than what it was previously celebrated as. Because, as I said, Christmas was always pretty raucous. People got drunk, they fought, they made far worse mistakes than photocopying your ass on a machine.
I have to say, Geoffrey Crayon definitely sounds like a made-up name.
But then also you have a lot of the traditions of Christmas being cemented by the Victorians as well. So things like Christmas cards. Christmas cards were invented by a man named Sir Henry Cole in 1843, and I don't think anyone wants to thank him for that.
I know the trees probably don't want to thank him for that.
Very good point, yeah. And originally they were actually a preserve of this sort of upper class, because to get one commissioned, drawn, and then sent, it basically cost a labourer a day or two's wages. So it's really the upper class who pioneered them first, and then gradually as sort of cards and stamps got cheaper, they became a sort of universal thing. But when they first were created, they were so weird.
Yeah, so the original Christmas cards were not quite how we're used to them being today. Today, they tend to be quite twee. But in Victorian times, it was very common for Christmas cards to take a slightly morbid tone to them. And there's a lot of Christmas cards which show pictures of dead animals, or animals fighting, or lots of frogs for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the connection is with frogs, but obviously lots of frogs fighting. They were obviously very interested in death, kind of crept into Christmas cards as well, which is a little odd.
Well, have you ever heard of Christmas Carol? They were sort of created around this time as well, and they come from sort of old folk songs, but they were sort of rewritten by the Victorians to become a bit more festive. But they're weird as well. I mean, the whole aspect of Christmas is weird. Although surprisingly, gift giving is not a Victorian thing. It predates it. For centuries, people had been giving gifts. Just to add that, even back in Samuel Pepys's day, he recorded in 1688 that the friends of Mr. Tierney at Colchester have sent him as a Christmas present a small barrel of oysters that will not open. So, quite disappointing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd fancy a small barrel of oysters for Christmas.
Especially one that doesn't open.
I'm sure he buried it with the cheese in the garden.
But yeah, that essentially is Christmas. It's basically based around a bunch of old pagan festivals, and over the centuries we've collected a few traditions along the way, and they were sort of redefined and reformed by both the Victorians and some Americans in the 19th century. And today we have the festival we all know and love.
So to summarise, it's kind of pagans, Christians, Victorians, commercialisation.
But yeah, the commercialization's always been there. But what is fascinating about Christmas is that there are some weird traditions that have sprung up because of it. And we're going to explore some of those right now.
Yes, so on the topic of commercialisation, one thing, which maybe people are familiar about, but was a little unknown to me, was KFC in Japan. In Japan, it has apparently become traditional on Christmas Day to go to KFC. Christianity is a minority religion. I think it's less than 1% of the population are practicing Christians. So Christmas doesn't really feature much in Japanese history. Christmas spread through the media, and they've picked up some of the traditions. However, Japanese kitchens tend to be quite small, and they tend to either not have an oven or they have a very small oven, so it's very hard to roast a turkey. So, in the 1970s, KFC, seeing an opportunity, began a marketing campaign, which they called A Kentucky for Christmas. And the idea was that rather than have to roast a turkey at home, you would come to KFC and you would get a Christmas roast chicken.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I'd love that if that were here. I generally would. And I think a lot of people would in this current climate.
Oh yeah, I mean there are years where I think I'd rather have a family bucket than a turkey again. But
it's less dry than turkey, isn't it?
It's nice crispy coating. If you are listening, KFC,
we are available for sponsorship.
This one's for free, but you pay for the next one.
I also believe it's also the most popular day of the year for KFC in Japan because of this.
It's become so popular that they have launched a special Christmas premium menu, which they charge 3,000 yen for, which I think it's a fair amount of money. I think.
You mean you don't know?
I'm not quite sure of the yen to GBP exchange rate.
That could be quite cheap for you. It could be like £3. Oh, you're actually Googling it.
So my sources tell me 3,000 yen.
Is that KFC sources? Yes.
Yes.
Nice little joke there.
So 3,000 yen is £21.49.
I mean, this probably makes me sound really cheap, but that's quite a medium to high end meal for me.
Yeah, there's no bargain bucket, is it? I mean, £21.49. You expect to at least be able to sit down at the table. But yes, that is KFC in Japan. It really kind of emphasizes just how commercialized Christmas has become. It just becomes this huge marketing opportunity.
Well, it's not always like that. So one of the other nice traditions I've come across is in Iceland, and actually Iceland has a bunch of crazy Christmas traditions, but this one's actually fairly new. It started during World War II, and it's called the Yule Book Flood. I'm not going to pronounce the Icelandic. And basically around World War II, when foreign imports were restricted, they didn't really have much stuff coming in, so all they had was paper, and paper was cheap, so people just started writing books and sharing them. And Iceland's population was not large enough to support a year-round publishing industry, so publishers then flooded the market with new titles in the final weeks of the year around Christmas. So you get this period now around Christmas in Iceland where people just give loads of books to each other on Christmas Eve, and then they spend the day reading them, and it's something they do every year, and I think it's really lovely.
On the topic of Iceland, also quite an interesting Icelandic tradition of the Yule cat, or the Jólakötturinn. He is a house cat the size of a house. What he does is anyone who has not been gifted clothes by Christmas, the Yule cat comes for them and takes them away, or he eats them, depending on the story you read. And he's a pet of a family of trolls known as the Yule Lads. But they're a family of trolls, and they're sort of the Icelandic equivalent of Father Christmas, in that they bring presents to children who have been good, and they punish children who have been bad. It's kind of a recurring theme in a lot of Christmas traditions, this idea of reward for good behaviour.
When you think about it, Christmas is the ultimate carrot and stick, isn't it?
Well, speaking about the stick, we'll come to that later, but the stick does...
Will we? You spoil me.
But yeah, we'll come back to that later. So the Yule Lads, there are 13 of them, and they have some amazing names. They all have names. They're all in Icelandic, but translated, they are amazing. There's one called Spoon Licker. There's one called Bowl Licker. There's Door Slammer. There's one I think you're going to like called Sausage Swiper.
Do you know you read my mind?
I know. Would you like to know what Sausage Swiper does?
I know what Sausage Swiper does, but please tell the lovely people.
Sausage Swiper, he hides in the rafters and he snatches sausages as they are being smoked. I really wish Britain would pick up the Icelandic tradition of the Yule Lads. But anyway, they own the cat, the Yule cat, and as I said, if you haven't been gifted clothes before Christmas, the Yule cat comes and eats you.
Well, every story has a happy ending, so It's nice to hear.
Here's a happy ending for you. So, the Yule Cat was popularised by the poems of an Icelandic poet called Jóhannes Ur Kotlum.
I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to show me up with your pronunciations.
I know. He was a very famous poet, and this poem became very famous, and it popularised the idea of the Yule Cat, and it was actually turned into a song by Björk in 1987, and this song has now become an Icelandic tradition. Björk singing a song about a huge house-sized cat who eats you if you haven't been gifted cloves.
Christmas really is a wacky time. I mean, saying that, there is one tradition I came across which isn't technically based on Christmas. It just happened to fall on the 25th. So in Peru, there's a place called Santo Tomas, and on the 25th, they have their own festival where they dress up and they get in a ring and basically beat the crap out of each other. So, men v men, women v women. It's called Takanuke, which is probably wrong. And as I said, everyone wears fancy dress, and then they basically call someone out to fight them in the ring. And it's their way of getting all their anger and frustration out of the year on each other. So if someone's wronged you, someone, stole a bit of your food or called you a funny name, this is your chance to get it all off your chest. And when Christianity came along, they still kept the festival because they felt it fit quite well with the whole, redemption and loving your neighbour. It's probably a very good idea as well. It just gets all that anger out of there. It's not festering.
This tradition, they used to celebrate that outside your house when you lived near the Millwall Stadium, didn't they?
Even when there's not a game on, yeah.
Now that our traditions have taken a slightly more violent turn, I think now is probably a good time to talk about the Krampus. So the Krampus is kind of associated with Austria and Germany and sort of Central Europe. And I guess, to put it simply, he's sort of the anti-Santa. We think of Santa and we go and see him. He's normally there and he rewards you for being good. But if you've been bad, his friend Krampus will put you in a bag and beat you with sticks.
Well, I think that's fair.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if there's going to be reward for being good, there should be a punishment for being bad.
No, I completely agree. Maybe they should introduce this back into schools.
Maybe they should. Krampus, however, takes a slightly more sinister tone. He's a sort of goat man with huge fangs and a huge tongue and horns. He's normally depicted quite grotesquely.
Are we not body shaming by saying that's grotesque? I mean, he's just different. Just different.
I mean, I'm all for, Beelzebub should be comfortable in the way that he looks, as should Krampus. But it is apparently slightly traumatic for some children when this sort of goat monster comes around with a stick and a sack.
Well, I know what I'm going to dress up for next Christmas.
Though saying that, there is another tradition around Krampus for the young men in towns to dress up as Krampus and to sort of roam the streets. As time has progressed, it's sort of taken a slightly more yobbish turn, so that there is now sort of alcohol is sometimes involved, and sometimes the police are called.
Well, I would actually argue that's quite in the spirit of Christmas, given that Christmas was always quite a yobbish, alcoholish time.
Most men who dress up as Krampus take it quite seriously, I suppose. They will wear sheep or goat's wool. They make masks to look like Krampus, and they'll have sort of fangs and tongues and blood and stuff. They'll wear chains and bells. They'll carry whips made of horsehair. It's all just sort of a bit of fun. So on the 6th, there's a festival. And this is the day the evening, when St. Nicholas and Krampus come round to your house and kind of judge you a bit.
It's the original Odd Couple.
I know, it's just like us, isn't it?
I hope I'm the goat man. I think that tongue would come in handy.
Moving on from the childhood trauma that is the Krampus, do you have any fun facts for this episode?
I do, but one thing we've actually omitted, but don't worry, we're still going to talk about him, is Father Christmas, or Santa Claus. And my fun fact is Father Christmas was actually a Turkish monk who travelled the land and helped the poor and gave away all his possessions around 280 CE or AD. And now he's risen to become the most famous Christmas figure. Oh, well, Jesus as well. But, they're in the same pantheon.
That's interesting. And was he a fat man with a big beard?
He wasn't a fat man with a big beard. He was a starving monk.
It's kind of the complete opposite of Father Christmas.
When you travel the land helping the poor and giving away all your possessions, you're not really going to have lots to eat or much money to eat. But modern Father Christmas, the one we all think of, that was basically invented in 1822. So it's bloody Victorians again. An Episcopal minister, Clement Clark Moore, wrote a Christmas poem called An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, more popularly known today by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas." And it gives us the idea of Father Christmas or Santa Claus today. The actual naming of Santa Claus and Father Christmas, everyone knows they're different. But Santa comes from the Dutch for St. Nicholas, which originated in New York in the 18th century. They used to call him Sint Nicolaas. It sort of got compressed into Sinterklaas. In this seasonal episode, I'm going to cram in my myth as well, which is also based around Santa Claus. That's the idea that his coat is red because of Coca Cola, because of their incredibly successful marketing campaign where he's obviously in a big red jacket, Coca-Cola's red, and he travels the land giving people Coke. But it's not actually true. Santa Claus, or Father Christmas, as a jolly man in red with a white beard, was immortalised in 1881 when political cartoonist Thomas Nast drew on the poem that we mentioned earlier, the "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," to create the image of an old Saint Nick we know today. And he didn't actually always start out as a fat, white, happy man. He was depicted as a wizened old man, an elf-type creature. It was really Nast who finalised that image of him as this jolly fat man. So what's your fact/myth?
Well, my fact/myth revolves around Charles Dickens. So we're going straight back to the Victorians again, I'm afraid. When we think about Christmas in the media, we think about the white Christmas. It snows on Christmas Day. Over the past, a few hundred years, it has hardly ever snowed on Christmas Day, at least not in Britain. And the reason we have this idea that most Christmases are snowy, and this just happens to be the one odd one that's not, goes back to Charles Dickens. Because whenever he used to talk about Christmas in his books, it would always be snowing. And the reason he did that was because when Charles Dickens was born in the mid-19th century, Britain was going through what they call the Little Ice Age. It was a couple of centuries where things were a little bit colder, and it was very normal for it to snow on Christmas Day. There's actually accounts of the Thames freezing over, and there's being sort of parties on the frozen Thames, and they would walk elephants over it. During Charles Dickens' childhood, it would have been really normal to have a white Christmas, so that's how he wrote his books. And from that, we've got this idea that it should snow on Christmas, but really, it's very, very rare.
Wow, no, that really is fascinating and depressing, because it means, especially now with global warming, it means our winters are probably going to be less snowy.
I'm dreaming of a damp Christmas. Doesn't really have the same sort of festive tone to it, does it?
And on that delightful note, that's our show for today.
Yes, thank you for listening to this bonus episode. Don't say we never give you anything.
Hopefully gave you some festive joy.
No, I think considering what our previous episodes have been like, this one's been quite a cheery one, really. Apart from the Victorian Christmas cards and the Krampus.
I'll be outside your house in a goat costume.
Cool. Well, that sounds horrific. I'll look forward to that. Just make sure you keep 2 meters away.
Well, I'll have the long tongue, so I won't need to stand so close to you. And on that, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yes, Merry Christmas. Please subscribe. We're available on all the usual podcast channels. You can also visit our website at thegallimaufry.show. You can email us at info@thegallimaufry.show. Thank you for listening, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.